Hey guys, this is Caleb with another DSLR video shooter gear review. Today we're talking about the Canon 70D, and I have to say I was really excited about this camera when it was first announced for a couple reasons. One being this is really the first time Canon has upgraded their APS-C sensor since the Canon 7D. I bought the Canon 7D when it came out, whenever that was, several years ago. So it's kind of dumb that it's taken them this long to do anything with that sensor. So we've got an upgrade. It's going from the 18 megapixels to the 20 megapixel, but the biggest feature is the dual pixel feature of the sensor. You can read a lot more about this online, but essentially it's a lot more processing information in the sensor. So you're not only able to do things like capture an image, but it's also able to do a lot of other functions simultaneously, like really accurate autofocus, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but this camera does an incredible job with autofocus. If you have a Canon 60D, the body and feel of this camera is going to be very familiar to you. It's really nice. It's right in the middle between the Pro line like the 7D, 5D Mark III, 1DC, and the Rebel line, which is a much cheaper plasticky kind of a camera. So it lands right in the middle. The functions work really well. All the dials are there. Instead of the two rotating wheels, you get the little joystick built into the rear dial, which is really nice. And of course you get the rotating screen as well as the locking mode dial, which I really like, and I think it's a great feature. So now let's talk about the sensor and if there's any real big differences when it comes to a lot of problems that we have with DSLRs. So let's go ahead and start with Moray. I went ahead and put both this camera, the Canon 70D, and the Canon 7D up against a brutal Moray test. I have some brick buildings outside of my building, so I went ahead and filmed both of those. And I really didn't notice any kind of positive changes on this camera compared to the 7D, which is very old. Now let's talk about low light sensitivity. I went ahead and did a couple tests, again, putting the 70D up against the 7D, and I really didn't notice that much of a difference. The noise level didn't seem to be much lower, maybe just a hair lower, but I did notice that the noise pattern seemed to be more pleasing. So on the 7D, it's a big blotchy pattern, and the pixelation, or the digital noise, kind of has a wider blotchy look, whereas on the 70D it seemed to have a much finer look. So even though the noise isn't necessarily lower, maybe just a little bit, you are getting what looks to be a more pleasing image noise. So if you did have to really push this camera, it's going to look a little better than some of the older DSLRs. Now I want to talk about autofocus. This is really where this sensor shines compared to other Canon DSLRs. The autofocus on this thing is incredible. You have a lot of different options. You can do spot. I prefer setting one section of the image to be in focus. And this is really cool because for something like this, where if I was recording myself and I needed to be moving a little bit, or if I needed to hold an object really close to the camera, it would be great to have autofocus because you could set it to, right in the center, or if I was looking at my monitor, if I was doing something more like this or an interview kind of a setup, you could set it to where your talent is going to be and have a little more flexibility. And it is really powerful. It's pretty incredible what you can do. So here's some demo footage of me having the camera on autofocus. And just one note, I really put this to the test because I put on the Canon 50mm f1.4. So at that low aperture, it's very difficult to deal with autofocus. And that is one of the slowest lenses, it feels like, for focus. It's very jumpy. You can hear it kind of grinding as it goes through the focus points. So it's not the smoothest lens for autofocus, but this camera still did an amazing job. The other great thing about this camera is you have a lot more options for selecting the way that the image is recorded to your card. This is something that's been on the Canon 5D Mark III and the Canon 6D, but now we're getting an upgrade from the 60D to this new 70D, and you have a couple more options, which is going to give you a slightly better image and a little more flexibility in post. The other great thing is you can use the touch screen on this camera to go ahead and set your focus, and that kind of brings us into talking about this screen and display. I really like the size. Flip out, of course, is amazing to have when you only want to use the camera in a lens, because you can obviously get lower angles or really, really high angles without having to use a monitor. But the touchscreen on this really blew me away. I never really liked touchscreens on cameras unless Apple ever came out with a camera, because after using iOS devices, it's just, camera screens always seem so choppy and chunky when it came to touch. This, however, is very responsive, and I found myself really liking the touch on here. Not only to change settings and get into the menus, but also for playing back footage. If you have been filming on Canon DSLRs, you're probably used to the rigmarole of going through and trying to select images and play. It can be really painful and difficult to do. Whereas on this guy, it's great. You can hit play, there's a big play button. You can even swipe to the next image, and it's just very intuitive, and hats off to Canon for coming up with a really solid touch system and a very responsive one. Something else on this camera that really separates it from the other Canon DSLRs is having audio meters on the display all the time. This is such a lifesaver, and one of the reasons I plan on purchasing one of these down the road. It's so nice to finally have audio levels on the screen all the time. I've been doing a lot of my podcasts with this camera, and I don't use my monitor. I'll actually just flip it around like this, and I can see my audio levels right there. It's just an added level of security to be watching your audio levels. And because of the touchscreen, you can just touch it and touch the dial and set your levels right from the main live view screen. I really hope Canon adds this to all their other DSLRs. It'd be great if they could do this in a firmware update, or if they would allow us to have that, because it's such a great feature. So after using this camera, I have come to really love it. I'm having a really hard time finding something I don't like. Maybe the biggest thing would be not adding a lot more features, but that's how Canon rolls, and they're just ridiculous with holding a lot of their cameras back because they don't want to cannibalize their higher level DSLRs or their video cameras. And I think this is a camera that is very flexible and really works for a lot of different kind of shooters. If you're getting started and have a budget that can incorporate this camera, which is around $1,100, I think it's a fantastic buy. It's going to be a great first DSLR, because you're going to be starting with a lot of features that the rest of us haven't been able to use, which is fantastic. It's very user-friendly, it's very intuitive, but this isn't just for beginners. This is for seasoned shooters. If I didn't want to shoot on full-frame cameras, this would be a fantastic camera body. The only reason I wouldn't recommend this is, again, if budget didn't allow, the next best camera would probably be the Canon 70D. Right now you can save a ton of cash on that thing because this is replacing it. I had a chance to go up to Door County, Wisconsin with my wife and brought this camera, did some filming, and at the end of the day, when we put all the pixel pinching aside and all the nerd talk about the new sensor, just working with this camera and getting out there and filming was a pleasure. I loved working with it. It's probably one of my favorite DSLRs to work with so far as a standalone camera. And the image just blew me away. Just love this camera and really look forward to getting one down the road and using it as my secondary camera. For more camera reviews, gear reviews, tutorials, and other articles, check out DSLRvideoshooter.com, and I will see you guys online.